So I keep seeing these discussions about a potential Russian mobilization or draft to push millions of Russian military-aged males to the front lines. This comes out of the Russian Duma, which is basically like the U.S. Congress, but Putin controls everything they do, where they pushed forward some bills that make it illegal to avoid such a mobilization if you're a Russian military-aged male. Putin is supposed to make a speech about this on Wednesday. Not entirely sure what this looks like, but it's supposed to be laying the groundwork potentially of a mobilization. Here's the reality, though. At this point in time, a mobilization wouldn't really do a whole lot for Russia. They needed these troops yesterday, trained, equipped, fully ready to go, not 6 months from now or probably even later. Any kind of mobilization would almost certainly fail to reverse the course for Russia in Ukraine. In fact, a mobilization could backfire on Vladimir Putin. It could accelerate a potential collapse of the Russian system within, as they know it, with the Kremlin and such. So multiple experts have talked about this out of the war studies at King's College, the department there. In fact, the foreign policy division of Johns Hopkins was discussing this somewhat on their blog system internally, and it doesn't seem like this is going to be a very good idea for Putin if he does, and that's a big if. There's a big if he does execute a mobilization. That's a humongous if. So, I mean, the real issues here, let's say Putin does execute a mobilization. The real issue is then what? Russia doesn't have the trainers to train these new soldiers because all of their trainers were deployed to the front line, where they're currently either fighting or have been killed or wounded in action. So there is no current training system like drill sergeants to train these soldiers, nor do they have the time to give them the adequate 2 to 3 months of training to be effective. I mean, this lack of instructors is only one obviously big factor, but there are other huge factors. There's no units. What units are going to take on these soldiers? They're just going to form new units? Where are they going to get the commanders? Where are they going to get the officers? Where are they going to get the non-commissioned officers to lead these troops? And by lead, I mean provide not only the know-how, but also the experience and the wisdom on how to fight a war. Those people, those soldiers don't exist right now because they're either currently on the front line getting their ass beat in 2 areas, both Kherson and Kharkiv, or they're dead. So all this does is it clogs up Russia's military systems, its garrisons with new bodies and beds. It drains huge amounts of capital and the coffers of Russia trying to feed and supply and provide weapons for and pay these soldiers. So what they're going to get is a lot of untrained, under-equipped, poorly led men who more than likely don't want to be there, who would probably surrender more quickly than wait for the prospect of being killed by Ukrainians. So, and if they are looking down the barrel of potentially being labeled a traitor, so they'll desert, disappear, or they will die. I mean, like I said, even a successful mobilization, let's say Putin pushes this out and he says, look at this, we have a million people. They needed those million people like a month ago, not 8 months from now at the bare minimum. That's not, 8 months, you can't train a million people. That's just the way it goes. I mean, currently the Russian military isn't training any new recruits because they have no trainers, as I've spoken about. I mean, those recruits that they were recently training got as little as 30 days of training before deploying. Russia has gotten so desperate that they drew volunteers from Russian prisons, gave them 2 to 4 days worth of training, and deployed to them, where lo and behold, these Russian prisoner soldiers, quote unquote, promptly surrendered to Ukraine. Now, can you imagine what some young Ukrainian or young Russian that had a future at some point in Moscow or St. Petersburg, who never wanted to fight in this war, who couldn't give a shit about the future of Ukraine or the future of Russia's control over Ukraine, showing up at the front line with just 2 to 4 days of training? It's almost like World War II again for them, where run at them in a Zerg Rush type of, for you gamers, you know about that, a Zerg Rush type of scenario, and if the dude in front of you dies and you don't have a rifle, pick his up. That's crazy in the 21st century. Those command structures aren't going to be there. And Ukraine has a steady flow of Western trained and equipped people. Now, it doesn't mean that Putin won't declare a mobilization. It just means that if he does, one, it's so dumb, but two, I just don't think it's going to be effective at all. It wouldn't produce any useful combat power in the near term, and it would almost certainly cause massive internal strife across the Russian population that he would have to redeploy his military or split his military into a domestic control system while still fighting in Ukraine. He would have to be dealing with the anger of his own populace, compounded with the sanctions and pressure from the wealthiest countries in the world, and then also contend with the fact that he's still losing a war in Ukraine. All of those combined inevitably lead to the Putin regime's collapse. So we'll see where he goes. He's really stuck between a rock and a hard place here, and either direction, whether it's a general mobilization or do nothing, I just don't see a positive outcome for the Kremlin and for Vladimir Putin at this point. Oh, and one other thing, inevitably this opens the door for a greater and stronger response from the West. Russia wants to escalate to a general mobilization and also wants to escalate by creating these sham referendums in the Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts. All it's going to do is feed fuel to the fire that is the Western wish to just find an excuse to give Ukraine more powerful weapons, the ATACMS, potentially even Abrams, etc. So I just don't see an outcome, like I said, for Putin where this doesn't blow up in his face 100%.